Well, thank you everyone for showing up tonight and viewers at home. My name is Shetan Noir and I am a cryptozoologist and a paranormal investigator. I am an author, a travel writer, and I also own the magazine company Squatch GQ Magazine Publications. And with that publication company, I produce various magazine titles, including Squatch GQ Magazine, Cryptozoology Digest, Into the Liminal Abyss Paranormal Magazine, and that covers not only the paranormal but ufology, weird locations to travel to, haunted locations, anything that's kind of out of the norm. I also have a magazine called Dinosauria and Prehistoric Creatures magazine, Rockhound and Prospector magazine. These magazines are all published quarterly, and everything is available on Amazon. If you type in Squatch GQ Magazine, that will bring up everything that I currently offer magazine, book, and journal-wise. Or if you type in my name, Shetan Noir, that will bring up some of my cryptozoology books that I have not converted over into the Squatch GQ account yet. So tonight's presentation is on cryptozoology of the Great Lakes. Now, most of our states in America have a lot of the same cryptid reports, with Bigfoot and Dogman being the top two. But here in the Great Lakes, we're kind of blessed in the fact that we do have the Great Lakes. So as long as you're touching one of the Great Lakes, you can claim that lake monsters are in that category. So we are going to get started. So here in Michigan, we have, of course, Dogman. It's one of our big top cryptids that everybody associates with Michigan who's in cryptozoology. But we also have the Nain Rouge, who is one of my favorite Detroit anti-heroes to talk about. His folklore is steeped with the actual foundings of Detroit. So how can you not love this anti-hero? Bigfoot, of course. We have so many reports of our big, hairy hominid primate who is frequently seen around the state. We have lake monsters, of course. All 5 of the Great Lakes have different types of lake monster reports. We have a creature called the Beast of Old 127. We have even reports of chupacabras, and tying back in with the lake monsters, we had the Lake Leelanau turtle. So the Nain Rouge. Depending on what your beliefs of the Nain Rouge is, you will probably either think he is of French origin, following the French settlers as they came from France into New France, which became Montreal, Quebec, and then into Detroit, where they founded it, and became the nemesis of Cadillac, and is still celebrated here in the city. We just March just came and passed, and of course we have the March to Nain Rouge every March, where we march from traffic jam and snug down to the Masonic Temple, and we are following / chasing the Nain Rouge. They were a bit kinder to him this year. They actually were more welcoming to him this year. So you either have that belief that he's of French origins or that he's of Native American origins, and he's a nature spirit. Now, if you're believing he's of French origins, then you're probably going to think that he is the one who wants to burn the city to the ground. But if you're seeing that he's of the Native American mythology, then you probably see him as a protector spirit. And I always leave this up to each individual person to decide what their beliefs of the Nain Rouge is. because he's been associated with different events, different tragedies in Detroit's past, but we can't really say whether he causes them or if he's warning of them. So I just kind of leave it for each individual person to decide on their own. Now, the Beast of Old 127. This creature has been seen, I've gotten 2 reports of it in the last 5 years. The first one actually happened up by Traverse City. A wife and her husband were actually driving their neighbor to the hospital, and they were following the ambulance that her spouse was being transported in, and a very large creature walked out onto the road in front of the ambulance, crossed to the other side, and disappeared down the embankment. Now, she described this creature as being camel-sized, quadruped, but it was not a camel, even though it had red, shaggy fur. She said it had more of a head like a bear, but very long legs, these weird, comical little ears, and a tail similar to a fox, but it was not a fox, because she has never seen a 500-pound fox before. And this happened, it crossed 50 feet in front of the ambulance. Now, she hunts frequently, and she went back to the location to try to look for evidence, try to look for tracks, could not find any. So about 3 years later, I get an additional report of a gentleman up in Midland who happened to be taking his children to soccer practice. And he said, here came this creature out of nowhere. He said there was empty farm field on my right, empty farm field on my left. It leaped across the road in one bound, 1, 2, boom, was over on the other side of the road. And when he reached the spot in the road where it had crossed and he's looking out into the field, there was nothing. And he said it was close enough that I got a good image of it. So did my child who was sitting in the front seat. And he said the thing that stood out to me the most was here was this great big creature with these very comical little ears on its head. And I've never seen anything like it. So I've heard you on different shows and podcasts, and I just thought you'd like my report. So not seeing this creature, not having any more details about it than what my eyewitnesses have given me, I just call it the Beast of Old 127 because that was where it was initially spotted. Now, Ohio. Ohio has a few of the interesting guys. The Ohio grassman is actually a Bigfoot, but he's more wheaten colored. He blends in better with the wheat fields and the tall grasses and the cornfields and things of that nature. So they have the Ohio grassman, but they also have dogman reports. They have the Loveland frogman, who seems to be a favorite of everybody. They have reports of a creature called the snallygaster. They have Mothman reports. They have the Freedom Township Demon reports. They have a creature called Bessie in Lake Erie. There's Bessie, and then there's South Bay Bessie. And they have the Minerva Monster. Now, the Loveland Frogman is an interesting little creature because it's said to be a 3-foot-tall frog that walks on 2 legs. And it's a very pudgy little creature, about 50 pounds, but it was initially reported in 1955 by a salesman who was visiting Loveland, Ohio. And he claimed that 3 of these creatures he encountered while his car had broken down. He got out of his car to try to figure out what was wrong. He heard a ruckus behind him, and as he turned around, here came these 3 beings walking out onto the road. And as soon as they noticed him, they started to verbally accost him. And according to him, they were cussing at him. And not knowing what else better to do, he got into his car for safety, and one of the creatures produced a wand, which was spitting out sparks, and it was after that, and after the creatures had moved to the other side of the road and disappeared into the woods, that his car started to back up, and he proceeded to drive into town and was telling people about these weird frog men. Then in 2016, a couple supposedly encounters them while they're out playing Pokemon. Now we also have a report of a police officer who said he encountered the frogman and he only saw one. But the frogman that he encountered was actually a green iguana whose tail had either been chopped off or bitten off by a predator, and it was trying to get over an embankment, so it was standing on its hind legs trying to crawl up over, and that was what he said was the frogman. But to this day, Loveland, Ohio still celebrates its frogman encounter. They actually have a festival now. It just started this year, so hopefully we'll have many more years of frogman reports. Now the Freedom Township demon is said to be a large flying creature seen around the Freedom Township in Ohio. The first report started in 2013. Now some people believe that this could actually be one of the Butler County gargoyles from Pennsylvania. But it's not seen often enough for many people to get a close-up look at it. It's always up in the sky flying. And so people just report it as the Freedom Township demon. Now Lake Erie, as I said before, has a variety of different monsters, including giant fish reports, giant turtle reports, plesiosaur reports, but Bessie, I think, is the one that we're going to talk about for Ohio, because this is said to be a long-necked plesiosaur creature, and it's been spotted in various parts of the lake. Sandusky seems to be an ideal spot for it, and the reason Sandusky sounds familiar to everybody here in Michigan is that's where Cedar Point is. So there's been lots of different reports of this creature, including a woman and her pastor and the pastor's wife who were setting up a Bible study in her backyard when they noticed that out in the lake there seemed to be an overturned boat. And worrying that somebody might drown, worrying that somebody might be in danger, they started calling out to the boat and calling for help and trying to see if there was anybody who needed their assistance. And as they were making a ruckus and entering the water, suddenly they noticed that the hull of this overturned boat started moving against the waves back out into the lake, where it eventually submerged and dove back under the water. And they all looked at each other, and the pastor said, I can't lie. And if anybody wants to call me a liar, well, God is my witness. We just saw something that I think is a lake monster. Now the Minerva monster was first seen in the 1970s by the Clay family. Now this is reported to be a 7-foot tall, 300-pound, Bigfoot-type creature. And it said that the creature was doing things like throwing rocks at their house. Rocks that were too big for any of the male members of the family to actually pick up and hurl for any distance to make an indent into the side of the house. So the local sheriff came out, did an investigation, did reports. They observed activity, and so they say that somewhere in Minerva, Ohio, there is still a Bigfoot creature on the loose, and that if you encounter it, make sure it doesn't have any boulders. The Charles Mill Lake Monster. In 1959, 3 teenagers, Denny Patterson, Wayne Armstrong, and Michael Lane, encountered a 7-foot armless, humanoid creature coming out of the water. The creature was described as having glowing green eyes and huge webbed feet. All 3 teenagers were able to survive the encounter and report it back to local authorities. And now there is a report of the Charles Lake monster. The Crosswick monster. This happens about 200 years ago, and 2 young boys were fishing, playing along the banks of a stream, and they said that this huge, long snake came up out of the water, and this snake had arms. And it proceeded to grab one of the little boys and took off with him, dragging him about 1,000 feet, and was trying to pull him into a large tree. Now the other little boy was screaming frantically, drew the attention of local hunters and other people in the area who came and were able to rescue the other boy. Now it's said that this creature, it stood up 14 to 16 feet tall, but it was 40 feet long and about 16 inches in diameter. Now, I am a reptile enthusiast. I have had my fair of pet snakes over the years, and I can tell you that anacondas, the biggest that we have measurements of, only are about 20 feet in length. And they are certainly not that thick. They're actually thicker. So 16 inches in diameter, about the size of a dinner plate, maybe a little bit bigger. Anacondas that I've seen are, you can maybe get your arms around them and give them a good hug before they squeeze you to death. So, not quite sure what species of snake this is, but the odd thing is them saying that it had arms. And they don't really give a description of how long the arms are, but I'm assuming if it could grab a little boy and drag him off, he had to have, pretty substantial arms. I do know that king cobras that can average 12 feet, if not longer, can raise up half their body length into a striking position, which is why even if you're 15 feet away, you are still in a striking zone, because once they launch themselves, that momentum actually carries them forward. So just a little, snake biology for you. Pennsylvania. Now Pennsylvania, of course, has Bigfoot. It has the Chikara gargoyle. It has dogman reports, thunderbird reports, snallygaster reports. Mostly flying cryptids, and it's interesting because Pennsylvania does have a lot of hills, has a lot of mountains, and according to some cryptozoologists, hills and mountains make a very good territory for flying cryptids, because not a lot of people want to hike up a mountain for nothing when you don't know what you're stepping on, and you might fall and either perish or be severely injured. Now the Butler County gargoyle is described as this gray, smooth stone-looking statue, and you almost think it is a statue until it starts to move, or its wings start to move. And then you're like, oh, maybe it's animatronic. That's a pretty good Halloween decoration. But I received a report from a gentleman right before I published my Flying Cryptids book. I was actually able to get his account into my book, and it went like this. He was actually driving early evening to a friend's house in a neighboring county, and he decided to take some back roads to get there. And he was coming up upon this one house that was kind of in a rural setting, farm, fields, stuff like that. There was a large gargoyle statue in the front yard. And he thought, wow, that's pretty cool. And he really didn't pay too much attention to the house or the yard or anything else. He was fascinated by this gargoyle. And thinking, wow, that's pretty detailed. It looks really cool. And as he was getting to where he would be driving past, he had slowed down so he could look at the whole thing. And as he was driving past, he was pretty sure he saw the head move. And he was pretty sure he saw the wings move. And he thought to himself, oh, it must be motion activated. It's moving because my car went past it. And it wasn't until he started to drive past it that he noticed that the wings moved even more. And he was about 15 feet past it when he's looking in his rearview mirror to see, okay, what else does it do? That he's realizing, well, the statue's not there anymore. But he's catching a glimpse of something rising up in the air behind his car, and he's realizing that this thing is flying. And it's at this point that he hits the gas, he gets to his friend's house, and he stays there for the rest of the night. And it's only until it's well into daylight the next day that he's like, I'm going to drive back that way and figure this out. So he comes upon the house again, and he notices that there is no gargoyle statue in the front yard. There is not even a depression in the ground where something of that weight would have pressed into the ground over time. There's not even a spot of dead grass if it had been sitting there for a long time. He's also noticing that the grass in the yard is very unkept. And this is, this house doesn't look like it's been maintained. It's an old farmhouse, and you can see that the screens are torn on the windows, and the shutters look like they're about to fall off. The front door looks like it's been boarded up. Nobody's lived at this house for quite some time. And it's at that point that he realizes, that thing that everybody's been talking about, the Butler County gargoyle or the Chikara gargoyle? Yeah, I believe I've seen it. Now in Indiana is known for their mud mermaids, their wildmen, which is essentially a Bigfoot, the Meshakingi, the Beast of Busco, the Green-Clawed Monster, the Mill Race Monster, Pukwudgies, Dogman, Bigfoot, and Ropens. Ropens is a modern term. It's from Papua New Guinea, and it refers to pterosaurs. So the mud mermen in 1984 in Venvey, Indiana, along the Ohio River, people saw what they claimed were mud mermaids. And these creatures were 5 feet long, had yellow colored skin. They had no hair, but they had prick dog-like ears. And it was also noted that their hands were webbed and they had sharp claws. And nobody actually got close enough to make an even more detailed analysis of them. But this report is associated with the Ohio River, which has its own interesting cryptid. Even very, very real cryptid reports of alligators. So something to be aware of when if you're going down on the Ohio River. The Meshakingi was reported in August 1838. The local Native Americans of the Potawatomi tribe were telling all of the settlers, don't go into this lake because there's a creature that lives there. And they described this creature as being 60 feet long, and it had a head like a cow. It was a gingy red color with yellow spots. And the Native Americans were like, it will destroy your canoe, it will drag you into the lake, it will eat you, we'll never see you again. And so for a while the settlers abided by this, but eventually the temptations to fish in the lake, to bathe in the lake, to collect water from the lake became too great, and we don't ever know what happens to the lake monster in that lake. but certainly the Native Americans believe it's still in that lake to this day. Now the Bisca brusco is described as a gigantic snapping turtle, which they have tried to catch on numerous occasions. They've actually drained the pond that he supposedly inhabits, but they never do a 24-hour watch on the pond. And anybody who knows animal behavior, when a habitat starts to disappear, like your lakes or your pond starts to get lower, well, they just go find another pond. So wherever you're pumping that water out to, he's just going to find that water and make his way to another waterway. But Oscar, as they have named the creature, is part of the legends of the town of Churubusco. So to this day, they still have a Turtle Days festival celebrating Oscar, and have even turtle monuments to Oscar in the town. Now the green-clawed monster. In 1955, near Evansville, Indiana, 2 women were swimming in the Ohio River, same river that the mud mermaids were spotted in, and one of the women was pulled underwater by what she claimed was a monster with green claws. The monster had a very good firm hold on her. She was floating on an inner tube, and it took her friend and her larger children to pull her free of the monster. Once they got her up on shore, they noticed that there was a clawed hand bruise wrapping around her leg, and it was black. And she had this mark on her leg for about 10 days, and she even went into her local pharmacist and was like, I can't get this stuff off my leg. So they did a scraping and they sent it in, and the only thing that they could determine was it was clay from the bottom of the river. So whatever had grabbed her leg had embedded this clay into her leg. Now, we don't know if this is also a mud mermaid and just a different color, but certainly it has those clawed, webbed hands, and she said it was trying to pull her under. The mill race monster. On November 1st, 1974, 4 women were sitting in a car having fast food, just hanging out like, most teenage girls like to do if they have access to a car. They're either going to the mall or they're going to gossip or do something of that nature. But as they were sitting there, this large green slimy haired monster appears, and the ladies start frantically screaming and just panicking, and this animal is attacking their vehicle, and they're honking on the horn. Finally it disappears, and they get the car out there, they go to the local police station, and they file a report, and the police officers are like, we don't believe you, and they're like, look at our car. And the officers can clearly see these clawed indentations on all the side panels of the hood of their car. And so they're like, I think something did happen. Well, word gets out, and a militia forms, search parties form, National Guard is called in, all the police are called in, and then the police are having to chase out the militias because they're like, somebody is going to get shot. And then we have to fill out more paperwork, and we have to fill out more reports. So leave this to us professionals. If you're not wearing a badge, leave. So after that, the reports kind of die down, and nobody really hears much about the mill race monster anymore. Just this one incident that left its impact on at least the witness's car. Now the pukwudgies, or pudwudgies. These creatures actually have a lot of different names, depending on what part of the country you actually are from or live in. and what Native American tribes you talk to. But Pukwudgie is what I refer to them, for one, because I can pronounce it very well. But they are described as these little men of the forest. So they are described as being no bigger than 12 inches tall, and they hide in the plants. They are usually described as being greenish in color. And one of the things that they like to do is when they encounter a human being, they will try to summon you to them. They will beckon you to come to them. And it said that if you approach them, if you follow them, then a group of them sees you and control you and carry you off to their lair, where supposedly you become one of their servants, because what 12-inch tall group of people wouldn't like a 5'8" or 6 foot tall human to reach high things for them? And only occasionally will they let somebody go. So if you're out hiking, if you're out near the Mound State Park or White River or any place that's wild, state parks, forests, woods, and you see a little person, after you pull out your cell phone and take a couple pictures of them or videotape them, just leisurely turn around and go back the way you came, because you don't want to follow them. You don't want to be taken to their realm, because we may never see you again. And you might become one of those 411 reports that everybody likes to read about and watch the documentaries on. Illinois. So Illinois has the infield horror. They have giant thunderbird reports. They have sharks, or at least a shark report going into Lake Michigan from the Mississippi-Illinois River. They have the Lake Michigan Mothman. They have Bigfoot Dogman reports, and they have the folklore of the Piasol bird. Now, the infield horror is a really weird creature. So imagine one of these little rubber eraser creatures that you might get out of the gumball machine. That is a glob, but has 3 legs and eyes. And this was described as the creature that was tormenting the village of Enfield. And in the 1940s and in the 1970s, this creature was said to approach people as they were out in their yard, either playing or working or doing whatever, and would just chase them. You would get into your house and you'd lock your doors, and it would be banging on your door, and eventually it would wander off and do something else. And it was said that it had very bright eyes and emitted a beam like a flashlight. And this was when, cryptozoology really started to become more and more well known. We had a term for it, and Bigfoot wasn't just Bigfoot. Loch Ness Monster wasn't just Loch Ness Monster. They actually had a category now. So everybody who was a cryptozoologist in the 1970s was racing to Enfield, Illinois to investigate this creature, and nobody was ever able to get anything more than eyewitness testimonies, no evidence, no foot tracks or anything of this creature. The Lake Michigan Mothman. Now, this is said to be a flying cryptid that is reported being seen a lot around the Chicago area. And while there is a multitude of reports, we can't really say all of them are legitimate reports. We think some of them might be hoax reports of people who hear about it or want to get some attention with it. I know various investigators in the Chicago area, Wisconsin area, Illinois area, who have gone and investigated these birds, and they're like, yeah, no, this one's close to O'Hare Airport. If there was something flying around here that was bigger than a drone, airport security and national security would be on that. So we're going to kind of pump the brakes on those reports. So, but if you're in the Chicago area and you happen to be looking up and you you see something flying around the sky, try to get a picture of it, try to get video of it, and maybe we can determine what the Lake Michigan mothman actually is. Now, Lawndale, Illinois will forever be known as Thunderbird territory because in the 1970s, two large black birds that were described as being almost condor-like, vulture-like, tried to carry off a 10-year-old boy named Marlowe. Now, Marlowe was actually able to escape. They only carried him about 30 feet. And he was hitting at the bird's legs. His mom was throwing objects at the bird. It dropped him. Now, poor Marlowe was never the same again. And because there was other witnesses, they were always pestered by the press, by local bullies who were all, oh, you're just doing this for attention. But it was reported that these two birds were witnessed for about 2 weeks afterwards in Lawndale area and near Kickapoo Creek. So we don't know where these birds came from. We don't know where they went afterwards, but they made an impact on Lawndale, Illinois. Wisconsin. Now, I live here in Michigan. I love Michigan, but Wisconsin is pretty much the coolest, one of the coolest states. They have a little bit of everything. And if it wasn't for the fact that you have to drive through Chicago to get there, I would be there every weekend because there is so much cool stuff there. But some of the creatures that they have there, the Beast of Bray Road, which is a dog man, the hodag. They have lake monsters because, of course, Wisconsin runs the shore of Lake Michigan. They have Bigfoot, they have Thunderbird reports, they have lizard men, and they have a creature called Peppy that actually is part Minnesotan too, because Lake Pippin runs between Wisconsin and Minnesota. Now for lake monsters, they have so many inland lakes that each one has to have one. The Lake Winnebago monster is described as a giant sturgeon. Devil's Lake has two creatures. One is a giant octopus, one is a plesiosaur type creature. Rock Lake Mills has a long reptilian-like serpent haunting its waters. The Beast of Bray Road has been reported for a very long time. We just lost Linda Godfrey, who started investigating the reports. She passed away this past fall, but essentially she was a up-and-coming reporter for her local paper. She had been a cartoonist for the paper, and she wanted to branch out into writing, and the editor finally said, you know what, we're getting these weird reports out of Elkhorn about this dog creature. Go investigate that. So she does. She goes to local animal control, and she's inquiring about these reports, and they said, oh, you want to see the whole file? And of course Linda's like, yes. Yeah. And they proceed to have her hand her an 1.5 inch thick file labeled werewolf. And from there she writes several books, and we come to know this as the Beast of Bray Road because it's reported mostly around the Bray Road area. Described as a dog-like bipedal creature standing between 7 and 9 feet tall and is very much an apex predator. The hodag. Now, every time I try to fix this slide, for some reason it reverts back to this slide. So there's supposed to be a picture of me and my little dog in front of the hodag statue, but instead you've got the Cloudwood monster, which is actually down in West Virginia. But the hodag is a marvelous hoaxed creature. It was created by Eugene Shepard, and at the time, it was a taxidermied creature that he had created, that he would take to local county fairs and he would put on display. And the first one, he said, oh yes, this is the real thing. I shot it, I killed it, I stuffed it myself. And people would pay their 5 cents or whatever to go in and see it. But people started to say, you know, I don't think that's a real creature. So he had to create a second one. But this time, he didn't stuff it. He made it just big enough for one of his very small young sons to crawl inside. And he would act like the monster and be growling and everything. And this was fine during the winter months, but when it started to get warmer out and it started to stink, his son no longer wanted to go inside the creature. So then he had to admit that it was a hoax. And Eugene was very, very colorful. He used to have a sleigh that he would have pulled into town, not by 2 draft horses or even 2 carriage horses, but by 2 full-grown moose. The Lizard Man. Now it's said that the Lizard Man was encountered by a son and his father that were driving their truck down an old road. Their truck died and the men got out to figure out what was going on with it, and they described seeing this flying green creature with leathery skin. Now both the father and the son immediately became sick afterwards. And they don't know if it was the creature itself, if it was something that was emanating from the creature, but after the creature left, the men were able to get home and reported being sick for several days afterwards. So we're not quite sure what they were exposed to, but apparently this flying lizard creature was enough to cause them quite a bit of illness. Minnesota. Now, Minnesota also has Bigfoot, Dogman, Pukwudgies, except they call them Bagwudgies up in there, Minnesota, Peppy, and Wendigo reports. Now, the Wendigo is one of the few cryptid creatures that I will not knowingly go out and investigate, because the Wendigo is essentially a parasitic paranormal entity that is always looking for a human host to take over. And what the Wendigo does is it causes you to have this insatiable hunger to the point where you can never satisfy it, and you're always looking for something to consume. And if you are out in the wilds, or it's the dead of winter when this mostly happens, your options might be eating off each one of your fingers, or your ears, or your lips, or your nose. Or if you find another human being, consuming them. And it said that the only way to kill a Wendigo is to boil lard and pour it down its throat, in hopes that the burning liquid will cause so much scarring that it will burst out of it and kill it. It can also only be killed by a Native American shaman. Wendigos are part of the Native American legends, and they don't really speak of them, because to speak of them means to get its attention, and it might come looking for you if you talk about it too much. Now, hopefully I have given you a showcase of some of the different cryptids around our Great Lakes area. And if you ever have any sightings reports, feel free to contact me at shetannoir@yahoo.com. You can find me on Facebook under Shetan Noir and send me a report. Now, I will tell you that before I will investigate the report, you have to fill out a couple of questionnaires, because I want to make sure that it's not a hoax and that my time's not being wasted. But certainly I do enjoy hearing about other cryptid creatures out there. And if you want to contact me, feel free to, either through email or on Facebook, and tell me your story. Tell me about your encounter. And does anybody here have any questions for this evening? Yes?
I was wondering, is there anywhere else we can see some more of your work on the subject?
So, I do have my website, which is Shetan Noir /Cryptozoologist. You can read different articles and interviews in my magazines. I do have a book on lake monsters and odd creatures of the Great Lakes. I do have a book on flying cryptids of the Midwest beyond Mothman. I will be coming out with a book on the name Rouge, within this year, the magazines take priority at this point. And I'm also trying to come out with a documentary on the Name Rouge, so that people who are not from Detroit, or who even are from Michigan and have never heard of the Name Rouge, can get a little bit more understanding about our hometown anti-hero.
Yes.
So you can find out more about everything I research, through those places. Yes.
I was wondering, can you talk more about Peppy?
So Peppy
Yeah.
lives in Lake Pippin, which
Okay.
runs from Minnesota down into Wisconsin. It's quite a large lake. And Peppy is described as a plesiosaur type creature. And if you go to, I believe it's www.peppy.net, it is actually a website created by a local businessman who I believe still offers a reward if you can either get concrete proof of Peppy or catch Peppy. So if you have a boat of some size and you want to go spend the summer out on Lake Pippin, it might be worth your while for $50,000 to go try to catch a sighting of Peppy. Any other questions? Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out today and for tuning in to our presentation. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I look forward to coming back in the future and from hearing from people. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.